Okay, spotlight. Here we go. All right, if you remember, we're in chapter 19. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. If you remember, every now and then I'll pull out a map just to make sure we see the direction. We see the route of the Tanya, the path, and the plan of where the Alter Rebbe is holding. So I'm just going to read before we go inside. Read just the chapter 18 through 25 map where we are in the Tanya. And it says, revealing the hidden love. All Jewish souls have inherited a natural love for God from the patriarchs. By tapping into this love, every Jew can be a Beinani. Through an understanding of divine unity, one sees how all mitzvot affirm God's oneness, while all sin separates the sinner from God. Thus, the Jew's innate desire to cling to God will be enough to drive him or her to observe all mitzvot, even under the most difficult of circumstances. So that's taking you, those few lines are actually the plan all the way through chapter 25. We didn't touch on to most of what I just said. That's going to be chapter 20, 21, 22, talking about the oneness of God, the power of a mitzvah, the separation caused through sin, and ultimately how we could each achieve the level of Beinani, even in the most difficult of circumstances. It actually brings out our Beinani power. So in order to bring this all together, we started in chapter 18 by introducing the power of this hidden love for God. And I'm just going to read to you the quote on chapter 18, just the three-line summary. It says, even lowly souls possess, as a spiritual inheritance from the patriarchs, an innate love for God and the potential to give their lives for the sake of his oneness. We all have that power innately. That's the love for God, and that gives us the potential that if we have a crisis and a spiritual danger where we feel that our very being Jewish is going to be threatened, we're ready to give up our life to remain connected to God. And finally, chapter 19, which we're in the middle of, I'll just read to you the beautiful summary that it gives here, is when a Jew is put to a true test of faith, his potential for self-sacrifice is activated, and he recoils from anything that would separate him from God. This is the fear contained within love. So we're going to talk more about that today. And let's see, Robin, do you remember what page we're up to? Let me just open up my Tanya.
Yeah, we're on page 223. Down
223 in the book, right?
Yeah, 223 in the book, down in the bottom.
Perfect.
This,
got it.
This is the complete opposite of Klipa.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. Then I'll bring it up on the Kindle as well. I'll just give a little bit of a summary, just to get us a little more acquainted. I always feel giving a summary is helpful. And what we're seeing now, where we are in the Tanya, just the path, is that we have many types of love that will be introduced throughout Tanya. Most of those loves are all going to be loves that is self-generated through contemplation, through meditation, through an appreciation of God. It gets you to generate this love for God. But the uniqueness of this love that we're learning about in chapter 18 and 19 now is that this love, you don't have to create it. It's already inherent. You already possess it. It's just hidden. You just have to activate it. You just have to reveal it. In chapter 18, we explained how this love is an inheritance. It comes from our patriarchs due to their full humility and just channeling God's desire. God granted the offspring and anyone Jewish or whoever converts to Judaism this innate love for God. We said that it comes from the power of a very spiritual level of chachma, which is the power of inquiry, the power of faith that is above what our mind can grasp. And that's a power, this chachma, is actually something we each are connected with, because all the spiritual levels are interconnected. So even a lowly soul possesses this power of chachma. And we said there was a symptom to this love. The symptom to this love is that we are ready to sacrifice our life if someone's going to come to you on the street and say, renounce your Judaism, bow to this idol, which nowadays is not such a big thing, but in the olden days, bowing to an idol was the way you worshipped, and it was like going back to the Greeks and the Crusaders with the cross. It was something that was forced. Like if you go back to the Spanish Inquisition, and many Jews were ready to die and sacrifice their lives, but remain connected to God, because they said, I'm never going to be renouncing my Judaism. And actually Hadassah now Hadassah and Yassi, my two older ones, are studying now for a Jewish competition, and it's called Chidon. They study all the mitzvot of the Torah. And Yassi now just studied the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, which means sanctifying the name of God. And there's actually different tiers, different categories of how this mitzvah of sanctifying yourself to God, how it plays out. A very standard way is that wherever you go, you have to realize you're an ambassador. You are representing God in the world. So, the example I gave to the kids is that even if you're just in Trader Joe's, you should know that you're setting an example of what the Jewish people are. And if unfortunately in the news, the Jews are seen as doing something wrong, and we're not going in the right path, and we're not being the light onto the nations, it's not only a single act, it's pulling down the entire Jewish people. We see it all. We see that all the time throughout history, and especially now, if you're looking in the news, it's something it's constant. So, sanctifying God's name could take on the meaning of being an ambassador on the street, but in the most literal sense, it's ready to give up your life to remain Jewish. So all this is an expression of this innate love, but we didn't define the love itself. We just explained the expression. We proved that we have this love because it's ready to be activated and expressed in a dire circumstance like that. But what we're doing now in chapter 19 is we're explaining the uniqueness of this love. We compared it in chapter 19 last week. We compared it to a candle, where we said a candle always flickers upwards. Even if you turn the candle downwards, the candle will still make its way upwards. And that's something unique that you don't see by anything else. Usually gravity pulls everything downwards. Fire rises upwards. And we explained on a spiritual level that's beyond even Rambam, Maimonides explained this at length. But there's different orbits, and the closest to the Earth is the moon orbit. And right beneath the moon orbit is where the spiritual source of fire, where that comes from. The other realms, the other sources for the other three elements, which is air, earth, and water, are all below. And therefore, gravity pulls them downwards towards the center of the earth. Whereas fire rises upwards because its source is there. So the fire senses, obviously not practically, but on a spiritual sense, the fire wants to cleave and wants to spring back into its spiritual source. So it's always flickering upwards. It's always trying to rise and leave its wick, even though leaving the wick would mean death. It would mean extinguished of fire. But that's what the fire wants. So it's quite interesting. If you were to ask, most people want to be utilized in the best way. You want to remain relevant. You want to be important. The fact is, if you light a candle in a room that's lit, or you light a candle in an afternoon sun, you don't appreciate the candle that much. Where would you think the candle wants to get used the most? In a dark restaurant where the ambiance of the candle, the light of the candle creates the beautiful ambiance. That's where it's going to be most appreciated. And yet the fire will tell you, no, I don't want to be in any fancy restaurant. I want to be connected to my source. Similar to this fire, we know from King Solomon, Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam, the soul of humankind, the soul of Adam, which we established last week. Adam is actually a unique expression explaining the Jewish people, while there's many other expressions to explain people, humankind. We said there's Gever or Enosh, but Adam, when it says Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam, that the flame of God is the soul of Adam, we said Adam is a term, a person used specifically for the Jewish people, for someone that was born Jewish or converts to Judaism. And we said there's something unique of the fire in the soul of us. And I explained last week, that's why when we have a yard site, we light a flame, we light a candle, because it's the soul is reminded, we're reminded of the soul through the flame, and we look at the flame and we connect with our loved ones. So for Yiskar, before Yiskar, which we just observed recently, we also light candles. But there's that very strong correlation between the flame and a soul. So what we're saying here is just like a flame always flickers upwards, even though it would mean extinguishing of the flame still wants to leave and go to its source and leave the wick. The flame within us, which is our soul, also has that desire and connection and love for God. And it's a hidden love, but it's ready to sacrifice itself, but remain connected to God. And it's just interesting from the Zohar along this topic, the Zohar actually says, I've been trying to train myself over Zoom not to shuckle when I'm on a screen, not to shake too much, because it could be dizzying for the people watching. But usually when I pray and when I study, my natural feeling is to shake. In Yiddish, it's called a shuckle. Some of you do it yourself. Some of you have seen it for sure. And it's the trigger of our soul. But when you study or when you pray, the soul is being ignited. And what happens when the soul is ignited? It's like a flame. It wants to go to its source. Its source is upwards. So it's trying to connect to its spiritual source. So it shuckles. It's similar to that of a flame, which also always flickers. So it's unlike earth doesn't move. Even air, when it moves, it's not moving up and down. It's just moving to its side. Fire flickers upwards, and that's similar to the soul that also flickers upwards. Let's just see one more piece of my note over here. So just to establish one more thing to make sure this makes sense from what we learned last week, the reason why the soul is compared to a flame is because out of everything in our world, the soul is the most spiritual of anything we could actually explain. For example, fire. Did I say, sorry, the soul is the most spiritual, but I'm sorry if I misspoke there. The flame is the most spiritual of anything in this world that we could relate to as something spiritual. For example, everything has a limit. This is what it is. I have a fruit on my table. I have a banana on my table. This is the banana. It's not going to make you another banana. Whereas flame could always make you more fire. Fire always can multiply. It can give off to another flame, and it never weakens the original flame. It says that when Moses bestowed from his light onto the 70 elders in the desert, it didn't weaken his flame. It didn't weaken his spiritual stance. Because that's the idea of the same thing of flame. It can constantly give and not diminish and not extinguish the original flame. Another thing is you can't quantify fire. Unlike even air or an earth for sure and water, there is a weight to it. You can even quantify it to some degree. Fire, you can't. And the law is that if you walk, usually on Shabbat, we don't carry in public unless there's an Eruv, which is a surrounding string that encloses an area. Otherwise, we actually don't carry in public. So my talit, let's say on Shabbat, I don't carry it to synagogue. I actually leave it in shul, or I bring it, or I wear it, because you're allowed to wear your clothing. But I don't carry things in my hand. So the law is that if you carry water, it's desecrating Shabbos. But if you carry fire, I don't know who would want to do that. But if you take a fire in your hand, it's not carrying anything, because it's not really a substance. It's more spiritual than me being able to. So anyway, that's a little bit why the flame is the perfect comparison to explain the soul. We explained that a little bit last week. But here's one final thing, just as I was preparing for today, just really going back and understanding a little more of this love. There's one more part that I don't think I explained properly. And I just want to, over here, we're learning about a different type of love than what we are mainly accustomed to. A love, most of our loves, there's obviously exceptions for family love and a deep relationship love. But of course, love is something that's very, it's any pop song, pop culture or whatever, it's all about love. Everyone's looking for love and finding love and wanting love. But it wasn't always like this. Love is amazing. To some, it's even worshipped. We're all looking for it. But in many Eastern cultures, or in the olden days, it wasn't as emphasized. In the olden days and in Eastern cultures, what's more emphasized is responsibility and duties. And that's I just want to explain to you how it works in Judaism, where love fits in, because over here we're learning so much about this hidden love, but I want you to understand where the element of this hidden love. There was a story, I think it's from the Baal Shem Tov. It's about a fishermen who were fishing, and they found this beautiful big pike fish, and they said, "Wow, such a fish, such a pike. This belongs. We have to bring this to the Paritz." The Paritz was the landowner or the baron, the person who was in charge of all the land in their area, and they said this deserves to go to the prince, to the Paritz, to the head, because the Paritz loves pike. So the fish heard as it's coming out of the water that the Paritz loves pike. So it felt, you know what? It's not my end yet. The Paritz loves pike. In his mind, in the fish mind, the pike felt, I'm going to go to the Paritz. I'm going to be treated with royal dignity. I'll be put into the royal pond and be fed all the best worms, because the Paritz loves pike. So as the pike is almost dying, as it's being pulled out of the water, it's feeling, you know what, my end is not so near. I'm going to be fine. And they put the pike in a freezer, in a cooler, and they're bringing it over. And the whole time it's hanging on to life, feeling I have a good outcome over here. And they bring it to the Paritz, and the Paritz says, "Wow, this looks delicious. Cut it up and put it on the main platter." And the pike, on his last with his last breath, the pike says, "You don't love pike, you love yourself." Because in truth, when we talk about love, so much of the love that we actually mean is self-love. I actually love myself. When we say, "Oh, I love this car," I don't love the car. It's not as if you're giving the car the massage. You love yourself. You love how you look in the car. You love how you feel driving that car. So most of the love that we know is actually self-love. It's not a bad thing, but it's just important to qualify it. This is coming from Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, where it says there are two types of love. There's very loyal love. That is, there's a love that's not dependent on anything. It's in Hebrew, from the Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, it qualifies it so beautifully. It says there's a love that's ava, which is the Hebrew word for love, ahava, shetluya bedavar. It's dependent on something. I love you because you have this. Oh, I love you. But when you stop having that, my love will fade. It actually gives an example. There was half siblings of David. His name was Amnon, and he fell in love with not really his full sibling, but his half sibling who was beautiful. And her name was Tamar. And as soon as he got what he wanted, he didn't love her anymore, because it was all dependent on something. He was attracted to her looks, her beauty. That's a very exterior, very not a real love. It's not a pure love. But then it says, then you have a very unique type of love that's not dependent on anything. It gives the example in Pirkei Avot of David HaMelech, King David. Before he was king, he was actually best friends with the son of Saul, of Shaul. His name was Jonathan, or Jonathan. And their love was so unique, because Jonathan, he was supporting David in trying to become king, even though Jonathan should have been next in line. His father was king. But their love was so real, it wasn't dependent on anything. It was an incredible type of love. Jonathan saved David, and there's a long story there. We're not going to go into the story of Navi, the story of the prophets now. But what I'm trying to bring out is that there's two types of love. The love that we know most, like the love of the Paritz to the pike. We love people because we love ourselves. I enjoy how you make me feel, or I enjoy your wisdom, or I enjoy your humor, or I enjoy your cooking. I enjoy your money. But when the cooking is not there anymore, when the money is not there anymore, how many friends do we still have? I'm not here to rebuke anyone. There's, of course, a very real love, but I'm talking about just in a very general sense. Interesting to tell you that in Hasidic circles, we don't fall in love before marriage. It sounds shocking, but we don't love the other person before we marry them. Because what we need before love is respect. So we actually learn, we date, and we gain an incredible respect for each other and an excitement for the love that we could build together. But who are we to know love? We don't know love yet. We're ready to fall in love, but we're not in love when we get married, because what type of person do I know you at that time? I don't really know you. We could get to know each other for a year, but it's not the real love. If that's what the love is based on, where is it going to continue? So we learn to respect each other. The foundation of any healthy and strong relationship is actually respect. Then you can build on that respect. You come to develop an incredible love. So even as one more thing, just I was putting down here, even in our relationship with God, you could have love, and we need love, but that love could be very self-serving. I love God because I can't wait for Shabbos all week. I love God because it's the source of my blessings. Look at all the blessings I've got. So therefore, and it comes from God, so I love God, but I'm loving what God gives me. A much deeper level of God is not dependent on what I'm getting or what I'm giving. It's dependent on just the relationship. The love we're talking about over here in chapter 18 and 19 is this hidden love that is pure. It's not dependent on anything. It's a love that is the best word I'm coming up with is pure. It's real. It's authentic. It's not dependent. That's the love that's innate. We have that love innately. It's an incredible gift that we were given, this love. It's not dependent on anything. And therefore, at any time, that love will spring forth. Even if I'm not getting anything as a return, it's just because I'm loving God. I hope that made sense. Thanks for having everybody. You're on ambassador. Awesome. And in Hasidic circles, the courtship is relatively fast, is it not? So maybe you don't have the time before marriage to develop love and respect. So if you for sure have the time to develop respect, love is I guess that's what I'm saying. The love that we're trying to build is not just the love, oh, wow, you were able to have a PhD in this. Oh, I love you. It's not about what you accomplish, it's about what we're going to be building together. It's a much deeper love. It's not about what you did. It's about who you are, and that I don't really know yet. So even if you spend a year together, you're not in love. And even if you fall in love based on that 6 months together, or even that year, it's that love could fade. If I'm attracted to someone based on their physical looks, oh, and then I love them, it's so fake. It's not real. So we're not going to get into the whole dating scene, how it works, but you build the foundation on respect. And then love is a natural consequence that will follow that respect. If you respect someone, you're going to really build an incredible love. So we're going to learn about that last thing I just quoted in that summary was about there's a respect part in the love itself. We're going to see that it's going to be the foundation. Awesome. Makes sense to me. Great. Okay, so let's see. I'm sorry I went on a little bit of a tangent, but we're learning about Chachma, this power of inquiry, which is the faith beyond understanding. And that's really where that love is coming from. And that's something we each have. We've been learning that inside. And we will see a beautiful continuation. I'm just going to pull it up on the Kindle in case, I'm not even sure I need it anymore. Does everyone have the book, the practical? Tanya, is it still helpful if I bring it up on the Kindle? Okay. You know, and until everyone tells me that they have it, I'm still going to pull it up. I want everyone to be fully, it's just going to make a little noise. I think the audio is like on automatic. So hold on one second. Okay, here we go. So I'm just going to share my screen and we'll continue studying. We're going to be learning about our ego and how that gets in the way. But beyond it all, we have this holiness inside that we have to just trigger. So let's see it inside. We'll start from the top of the page in the Kindle, which is toward the bottom of page 223. Having defined. Does that make sense to you, everyone else? Is that the right? Okay, good. Awesome. All right, I'm seeing the good news. Great. So here we go. Having defined holiness as the voiding of identity and ego, that's amazing explanation of holiness. Holiness means voiding the ego and an openness to something higher than self. It follows that the counter force of holiness, klipa, is defined by the reverse. So now we're going to go into klipa. And just to mention to everyone, I'm just going to take one more moment. I'm the podcast, I think I've told you about my podcast last month. So I've decided that the podcast will be more dedicated to the weekly Torah portion, learning in 10 minutes or less, learning a very short but relevant and powerful teaching based on the weekly Torah portion, delving deeper insights. So you can find the podcast either if you have an Android phone or a Apple phone, just type in either my name, Menachem Landa, or Soul Journey for Joyous Judaism. And I already added a couple of short podcasts for the week of Bereshit. One of them, which is this week's Torah portion. Thank you, Robin. I'm so happy to hear that. One of them is about this ego and cleansing ourselves. You'll see that as there's part 1 of Torah and part 2 of Torah. Part 1 is realizing the relationship with God. Part 2 is putting ourselves into it. So you'll see that as we, if you listen to the podcast, which just went, this week's Torah portion just went on last night. So you could follow that there. But over here, we're learning the difference. It's an amazing idea. When you say, oh, I'm feeling holy, holy means you're feeling less of yourself. There's a void of self and ego that allows holiness in. Godliness is in. Ego, and I think I've quoted this before, ego is ego, is like edging God out. The more you have of yourself, the more there's less of God. But the more you cleanse yourself of yourself, which means there's less of self, that's more holy. You're allowing God in. So the opposite of holiness is klipa, when there's more of yourself, when you're feeling yourself a little bit too much. Let's see that inside. This is the complete opposite. I hope everyone sees it. This is the complete opposite of klipa and seter achra, which produce the souls of the nations of the world who are self-serving. So there's other nations that one of the main things that is all about making yourself feel good. And while that sounds so nice, the more it's about self-serving, and take just American society, the ideal would, let's go back to JFK in the early 60s, ask not what the country could do for you, but ask what you could do for the country. It's about giving. It's really, I think, what America is, one of the important things that foundations that America is built on. But this is a beautiful quote now we'll see from Esav, who Esav was the evil twin of Yaakov. And what does he say? He says, give, give. Let's see the next paragraph. The tendency of klipa is to say only, give me, which is, the quote is, have, which is from Proverbs. Or from Esav in the Torah, the quote is, haliteni, which means Esav said to Jacob, feed me, never wanting to give back in return. And this self-serving mentality is caused by the feeling of ego and separateness from God. As stated above, the opposite of Chachma's character. So Chachma, we explained, is the power of what is it? Koachma, which means it's not about me, it's about the faith in God, it's about rising to a higher source. That's what Chachma is. The inquisitiveness and openness, the humility and surrender. The opposite of that, of Chachma, which is holiness, the opposite of that would be Klipa, which is just the shell. Klipa means the other side, the outside, the external facade, which is all about self. And we see that in the root of it all, which is Esav, which is the root of Klipa. Esav says, give me, where there's a story of Esav and his brother, where Esav came home after hunting and he was hungry, and his brother was in the middle of making food for his father. And he says, give me the food. And he said, just pour it down my throat. And he just said, like, feed me, give me. So that's the epitome of klipa, which is all about me. And in nowadays, I can't make too much fun of it because I have so much of their gadgets, but it's about the iPad, and it's about the iPod, and it's about the iPhone. It's all about the I, which is the epitome of klipa. It's all about give me more. What else can I get? So that's the opposite of holiness, which is about you, like YouTube. And that's where our Tanya classes go. It goes on YouTube. That's the holy I'm kidding. I don't think YouTube is that holy, but it could definitely be used for holiness. But it's about the you. It's about the other side. It's about the God in it. Anyway. Therefore, the forces of Klippa are referred to as dead. Wow, it's a heavy-duty expression. Klippa is dead. That's from the Zohar. Because Chachma gives life. That's from Ecclesiastes. And the verse states, they die without Chachma. Yamutu v'lo b'Chachma. So it implies that Chachma is the source of life. And anything opposite of that, which is ego, is a source of death. So let's see if he explains that in the we're now already on 224 in the book, or the bottom of the page of the Kindle. Life is a result of interconnectedness. I love that word. You are only alive because your organs and limbs work together in a wondrous unity, right? If the heart is not really connecting with the liver, it's not that healthy. Or with the brain and the nerves, everything has to have a harmonious and united connecting all over. If your arm, for example, would lose its blood supply and nervous connections to the rest of the body, it would die, right? The arm would not work anymore. In a broader sense, something is only alive if it is connected. Let me just turn the page here. With God. Klippa and all that embodies is an energy of ego, fragmentation, and disconnectedness. Therefore, it is compared to death. Every line over here, you can actually just meditate on all of these, and it's a powerful thing. That the epitome, what is life, is connected to God. So something that's disconnected, fragmented, which is klipa, and literally he's going to, I think, explain the literal translation soon. But we've had this in chapter 1 and chapter 6 and 7, where we focus more on klipa. So I'll just explain it now. Not everyone was on our classes back then. Klipa literally means a shell. You have an orange, you have the peel, or you have a nut, and you have the shell around it. That's the klipa. It means the husk, the outside of it. The outside is all about ego. It's superficial, and that's compared to death because it's not really connected. That's what happens in our body if our limb is not connected to its source, it dies. Similarly, with Rishayim we know from already chapters 11 and all the way from chapter 1. Rasha is the wicked, and sinners of Israel, before a scenario arises where their dormant love is activated, when they are put to the test to sanctify God's name, convert or die, until that happens, skip a little bit, until that point they lack faith, since the component of Chachma within their divine souls, which houses a spark of godliness from the blessed infinite light, is in a state of exile in their bodies. So they have a soul, they have this Chachma, but the Chachma is a slave. The Chachma is in exile in their bodies, and it's not able to be activated. And all that's come out is the outside, the external facade, and that dormant love is totally exiled. That Chachma, that spark of God, is not felt. So it's an amazing thing, because could you imagine, in Yiddish, the term I think would be used, it's a shanda, it's so sad, it's a shame that you have this golden soul. It's a power of the infinite. It's coming from God, and it's part of God's soul, and we have that inside of us. But what happens is our ego tends to ignore that, and it gets less and less. That infinite soul becomes exiled and shackled in the external, in the facade that we put up. That is, for the most part, what a Russia has. Yes, Robin.
So I have a question.
Sure.
So is it fair to say that ego then itself is klipa? Because ego is a peel, a covering, like on an orange that we put around ourselves, and inside it's the soul. Is that it?
Absolutely. And and we just need to make sure to define ego and self-esteem as separate, because of course self-esteem and self-worth is a crucial, valuable element in our service. We need to feel worth, and the Talmud even says you have to feel like you are the most important thing in the world, that the whole world was created for me, and every action I do is making a difference. But at the same time, ego, if you take from the Talmud says that ego is equivalent to idol worship. Could you imagine? God says, A person with ego, I can't partner with because he's not letting me in. So ego is the root of evil. Yeah, absolutely. And to the point, every day I learn a little section of Tanya called Chitas, which is divided for the year. We learn a few lines of Tanya and we finish it throughout the year. Today's Tanya was all about saying that anger is very strongly connected with ego, and that's actually coming from chapter 1 of Tanya. They both come from the element of fire in the what's the word I'm looking for? In the element of fire, you have fire, anger, your blood boils, right? And your anger, you get more angry until you snap and it heightens. And ego is the same. It's all about heightening myself. The more a person is egocentric, the more anger is easy for them because how dare you do that to me? You know who I am. So ego and anger, those are actually all equivalent to idol worship. The Talmud actually goes at length in the tractate of Sota, one of the tractates of the Talmud, going on and on about the almost the animosity God has towards ego and the danger of ego and how we have to be so careful from it. Because ego just quite frankly means more of me, less of God. And that's the root of klipa. That's exactly what klipa is. Klipa says it's about me, not about God. That's the animal soul, right? It's all going to be connected. So we're all going to good question. Money, lust for material things are wrapped up in ego. In a way, these things are idol worship. Thank you, Shira. Exactly. You read my mind. Awesome. So I know I'm taking my time here. We're not really covering so much ground, but really all of these things, you know, that's ego is, which is klipa, is the opposite of chachma. Chachma is life. It's about surrendering myself and connecting to God. When I'm feeling too full of myself, that's going to be like death because you're not really connected to the source. It's a powerful stuff. It definitely is a lot of spiritual symbolism here. But until you activate that soul inside of you in a time of crisis, a Russia doesn't feel that connection. All they feel is the klipa, and that's what's driving them. Let me just share the screen again. But thank you for that question. That was great. Okay, so while the sinners of Israel do have a spark of God shining through the chachma in their souls, that does not necessarily mean that they will have faith in God or be drawn to his worship. The light may remain blocked and exiled in the animal soul, which is from klipa, in the heart's left chamber, and that klipa rules and dominates the bodies of Rishaim. So you have people that are quite frankly wicked and couldn't give a hoot, and they do everything wrong in the book. It's because they're being driven by this sense of ego, and that's the root of and they don't really control it. So the animal soul, which is rooted in the left chamber of the heart, the left ventricle, it's being dominating. It's dominating them. So this egoic nature of klipa inspires a self-serving mentality. If it succeeds, that sense of unhealthy self-importance will detach the person from the chachma in his soul, leaving the divine spark within chachma exiled, and here's the most sad part of it, and powerless within him. So it's not that your soul leaves you. You still have a godly soul. It's just powerless. It's voided. It's feeling unheard. It's feeling, it's not able to get your attention anymore because it's totally being dominated by the animal soul. The body is being dominated by the animal soul. And it's sad to hear this, but there's people that have this. They're not in control of themselves. Their ego is what's driving them, and they're fully egocentric. According to the secrets of the Shekhinah's exile, as mentioned above. So I don't know much about the Shekhinah's exile, but or the secrets of it, but the Shekhinah is in exile, and similar to the Shekhinah, which is God's divine presence being in exile, our soul is also in exile. When we don't allow our godly soul to shine, when we don't allow the chachma, which is our connection and faith in God, to be at the front, what happens is klipa takes over. Klipa is all about self, about ego. And that's the central thing driving it. As we have explained, the exile of the Shekhinah, which is God's divine presence, can be understood Kabbalistically as referring to the spark of God and Chachma trapped inside a sinful person. So over here he's translating it the same. Shechina, he's not just saying it's God's divine presence in the world. He's saying it's God's divine presence in you, which is the soul. And that soul is trapped. Sad to think, but it's a fact. So with this in mind, we can now appreciate why the presence of Chachma in the soul can be responsible for a dormant love. So now we're going back to the source. We're saying that we have Chachma inside, and Chachma is what activates this dormant love. We have a love that sometimes just is sleeping. This pure love that we were talking about before, and we have to activate it. How will it be activated? Through waking up the Chachma. The presence of Chachma allows the activation of the soul. Let's see how. That is why this natural inherited love of the divine soul, whose will and desire is to connect with God, the blessed giver of life, is called dormant love. So this love is called, and these are, I'll tell you the words in Hebrew, just as an important word to know. It's called ahava, which means love, mesuteret, which means hidden or dormant. It's a sleeping love, a dormant love, a hidden love. That's the love we have. It's natural, it's inherited, but it could be sleeping. This love just wants to connect to God, but it's asleep because it's hidden and covered by a sackcloth garment of klipa. In the case of sinners of Israel, the sackcloth garment is a quote from the story of Esther when the threat of annihilation came through from Haman. It says Mordechai and the Jews mourned with sackcloth. We mourned. So it was like we were covered with sackcloth, which is klipa, covering over this dormant love. And that's how a person can sin, because their love for God is hidden, and therefore it's not felt, and that's what drives them to sin, because they don't care, they don't realize what they're doing. And it is from this klipa that a delusional spirit enters the Rishaim to incite them to sin. As our rabbis, the blessed memory taught, a man will not commit a sin unless a delusional spirit enters him. So we have a spirit that is allowing us to be delusional and think, oh, I could sin, and it doesn't make a difference, because that love inside of you is sleeping, and what takes over is a spirit of delusion, and it allows you to sin. So it's the ego that drives this. And just to repeat one more thing, the ego is the opposite of Chachma. Chachma is the power of faith and surrender to God and connection to God, the source of our soul. Our soul of God is coming from this power of Chachma, which is the highest of spiritual levels. It's the power of inquisitiveness and connecting to God. And we all have that, right? We're all interconnected with that soul, that power of Chachma. But the problem is our ego fools us, and it covers up and exiles this Chachma, this soul within us, and this love for God that's within us, and then we're kind of stuck. So section 3, this is the important part. Now we've got to wake up Chachma. So if you're sleeping in the class, we got to wake you up. But if you're sleeping in the Chachma, which many of us are, we need to wake that up also. So let's see how we do that. So section 3, Chachma awakened. And let's see it inside. Let's actually read, I see on the bottom of 224, I see a Hasidic thought. So you don't see it in your book, on the Kindle, but you'll see it in your book on 224. It says like this: while the opposite of good is evil, the opposite of holiness is a more subtle destructive force, ego. It's amazing. So you have good and evil, and then you have holiness and ego. Ego is the opposite of holiness. It's the enemy. Ego is the opaque self, a misguided sense of self-importance that acts as a blockage to God's infinite light in your soul. So ego is the stumble in the block on the road. If Chachma is the window to your soul that allows God's light in, then ego is the thick curtain which blocks that light from your psyche. Amazing, beautiful thought all about the ego, that Chachma is the window to your of your soul with God's light. Ego is that thick curtain that blocks the light from getting in. Powerful. And that's where your soul could be exiled. And our job is to wake up that Chachma and remove that thick curtain. And when you have holiness driving you, and humility driving you, think of it. You're going to be an amazing mensch. You're not going to get angry. You're not going to be arrogant. It's going to be all about the other person and all about God rather than all about self. So we just got to wake up this chachma. Let's see if we could do that today. Section to be chachma awakened. Having emphasized how the divine spark in chachma remains exiled and powerless in the sinners of Israel, the Tanya now stresses that it is never extinguished. This is the fundamental thing. This power of soul, of chachma, no matter how exiled it is, it never dies. It can never be extinguished. That's why we never give up on anybody. Because no matter how sinful they may seem, deep down in the root, they've got the soul. And it's alive. It just needs to be awakened. However, this exile of the soul's component of chachma, let me just take a quick swig of coffee here. Hold on. However, this exile of the soul's component of chachma is only true of chachma's energizing influence on the rest of the soul. But the root and core of the divine soul's component of chachma remains untrapped in the brain. So the way the chachma extends out to the rest of the body and has control, that may be sleeping, that may be dormant, that the love is not felt, and it's not dominating. But in your mind, the chachma is always there. The soul's component remains untrapped and does not actually become exiled and enmeshed in the sackcloth garment of klipa in the heart's left chamber. So let's just see the summary. The exile of an entity implies that it is A, present in a certain location, and yet B, stripped of its power and forced into activities against its will, right? That's what exile means. It's there, it's just powerless. The Tanya clarifies here that it is only chachma's energizing influence that remains both present and powerless, exiled within the sinful part of the person, the left side of the heart. The root and core of chachma, however, is located in a part of the soul uncontaminated by klipa, the seat of the divine soul in the brain. Therefore, it would not be correct to say that the root and core of the chachma is exile, since it is not present in a location of klipa. It is merely dislocated from the rest of the person and unable to have any effect. So let's just see further. Let's squeeze in a few more lines here. Rather, with Rishayim, it is as if the chachma were asleep, failing to have an effect on them. In its home turf, the brain, which is in the brain, chachma remains in full force. It just doesn't have any significant effect beyond that, so it's effectively asleep. So you have chachma. Chachma remains in the brain, but it can't have any effect on any other parts if it's exiled, and that's why it's considered to be asleep, but it's never extinguished. Turn the page on the Kindle. Chachma remains asleep in Rishayim as long as their das and bina are preoccupied with worldly pleasures. As we learned in chapter 3, for an idea to give rise to an emotion, 3 mental processes are required. You have chachma, which is inquiry, bina, cognition, and das, which is recognition. Even in the case of Rishayim, the root and the core of their chachma remains pure and intact, but chachma fails to influence the heart because bina and das have been contaminated with an obsession for self-gratification. Amazing. Hold on one second. Let me just clarify this. I love this. This is good stuff. So this is the epitome of Chabad. Chabad stands for chachma, bina, and da'as. Chachma, we've been clarifying now for several weeks already. Chachma is the power of saying, what is it? It's the inquisitiveness, the inquiry, looking outside of you to try to get a new idea. So if you, just practically, you may have a person who's very innovative and great at inventions because they have a great power of chachma. They may have great ideas, which is the seed of an idea, but it also has to be able to be implemented. They need to be complemented with someone who could carry out their idea. So that's chachma and bina. In the male and female, we said the male is the chachma that gives the seed, and the bina is the woman that develops it in the womb and puts a frame and blood and the bones and the veins, everything together in order to get a healthy, a living child. So you need both components, chachma and the bina. But in our soul, we said chachma is that seed of connection with God. In Yiddish, we call it the pintel yid, the point of godliness, of our Jewishness that we have. It's called our soul. That soul we each possess, and that soul by very nature has a natural love for God. It's just inherited. We have a love for God. But that soul, what happens is that soul could be exiled. That soul could be shackled up and dominated by klipa, with ego. Ego makes the soul, the chachma, and connection with God less heard, and becomes exiled. But what we're saying now is that chachma can never be destroyed. The chachma remains in the mind, maybe in the heart, where the animal soul is. Chachma doesn't have a domination, but in the mind, chachma is always there. It's always present. It just is asleep. That love that it has is not able to express itself. It's dormant. What it needs, this is the last thing I want to make sure I explain well, is that, and going back to chapter 3, we explained the biology of the soul. We said that the soul has 10 soul powers. The first 3 of the 10 are cognitive, and the next set of the 7 are emotional. The way we actually explain these 2 categories in chapter 3, we said it's like a parent and child relationship, because the cognitive, which is the parent, gives birth to the child, which is the feeling. Whatever you think about, you'll feel. You'll have a feeling, either positive or negative, a happy feeling or an angry feeling, but the feeling will come based on what you're thinking. So what we're saying here is that we all have the power, the godly power of chachma. It's our soul. But the worry is, the problem is that our souls could then be preoccupied with the bina and the das, which is developing and analyzing an idea and applying this idea in our relationship with God and the way we serve with others. That could be preoccupied with egocentric activities. Therefore, the chachma doesn't really have the channel to bring it through, to carry out and to dominate the feelings of the person, because the chachma is there, but the bina and the das, which is the next steps of the process in order to get through to a feeling, the analysis, the contemplation, and the application of it, which over here we've been translating bina and das as cognition and the recognition, recognizing the idea as a full thing. It's being preoccupied with egocentric activities, with our own self wants and self-serving. Therefore, the chachma doesn't have who to speak with. So the chachma is exiled. It's there, but is not able to have any practical expression of it. So I think that's what we've been explaining here. And I want to read a practical lesson. So if you have it on your book, it'll be on page 226. I want to make sure we squeeze us in before the end of the class. Practical lesson. If you don't have it in the book, that's fine. Just listen to me. If you still have the chachma to listen, and it goes like this. Only chachma can be a channel for holiness, because the other parts of the soul are too inherently self-serving. Your chachma never becomes extinguished. It may become exiled and powerless due to repeated sinning, but it is always there, waiting to be reawakened. Chachma is awakened by a test of faith, that we're going to learn this next week, such as convert or die, which explains why so many otherwise non-observant Jews have chosen martyrdom for their faith. So that's where really the main thing that we're going to be learning now. This is such a fundamental idea of Torah, of Tanya, is that because of that power of chachma, no matter what layers are polluting and contaminating the soul, the chachma can never get extinguished. And as once you could awaken that chachma, that power of soul and faith within, the person's love becomes so strong. And you see throughout history times when people that were otherwise non-observant, but yet then they were faced with a challenge, they stood so strong. Where did that come from? Is because it triggered that chachma that otherwise was dormant, but it's that love that all of a sudden became fully awake. That power of connection with God and faith and oneness with God became fully channeled in them. So most of the time, it's because of everything else that they've been doing, it's not felt. But there are times in a spiritual crisis when they feel that their very being Jewish is threatened, in a time of, quote, convert or die. We see throughout history over and over again, Jews ready to stand up, even if they've never even observed Yom Kippur or done anything else. But here, it came so strong. How do they have that power? It makes sense now because it's coming from Chachma. It's coming from a supra-rational place. But why don't we feel it all the time? It's sleeping. The sins and our routine of ego just covers it up. So just a question that's coming in privately. If Chachma is the seed of Hashem, where does the Bina and Das live in us? It's a good question. We're going to get more into it, but Chachma is the seed of God in us, right? And the Bina and the Das is us developing that seed. It's in our, it's the way we apply ourselves. It's the way we study Torah and the way we fulfill mitzvahs. It's all in the Bina and Das, and then it leads to the emotions. I guess we'll see more of that as we read more in chapter 20, 21 about the oneness of God and the performance of a mitzvah and what it triggers. We'll see more of that. Sounds like ego is a purely human construct. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Soul has 10 soul powers. First 3 are cognitive, and the next 7, Maddie, are emotional. So the first 3 are cognitive, Chachma, Bina, and Das, and from there, it leads to the emotional parts, the power of love or the power of fear or anger. Anger could be also in a positive sense. You could hate people that are going, not hate the person, but hate actions that are going opposite of God. And you stand up for God as a result of that. Respect, all those things come as an emotion, endurance, humility, communication with others, patience. We'll have to learn all of them, but that's all part of the emotions that come as a result. Okay, so that will do it for today's class. We'll continue next week on God willing on page 226. Thank you all for joining, and try to have as much chachma in your week, realizing that you have this power that can never be extinguished, connection of God, and just try to allow it to the surface. Don't wait for a crisis for it to come out. Allow it expression today. You bring it out by a mitzvah. All right, everyone, be well.